There aren't that many trades that I have found to be shocking in recent years in the NBA. Generally speaking, trades that have occurred in the last 2 or 3 seasons have been somewhat expected, usually because it's clear a player is either disgruntled, requests a trade even, or the writing is on the wall that they no longer fit the long-term plan of their current team. But I was pretty shook by the late off-season Shams bomb, which, by the way, it still feels weird that we won't be getting any Woj bombs ever again. But when the notification came through, I almost thought I read it wrong, or I was looking at a fake Shams account, or maybe Shams got hacked, because seeing Karl-Anthony Towns being included in a trade deal to send him to the New York Knicks just seems so implausible to me, when there hadn't been any rumors or any indication that Cat was being shopped around by the Wolves, and this especially coming after the season the Minnesota Timberwolves just had, where they had one of their best years in franchise history, going to the conference finals only the second time reaching the conference finals ever, and they decided to do a big shakeup of their roster. And so I thought, okay, let this marinate a bit. Let's think about this a bit more. What could be the rationale behind it for both sides? Like, we all have that initial knee-jerk reaction whenever we see a big trade come through. And then a few hours or even a few days pass and it starts to make more and more sense. But honestly, and yes, I'm only recording this a few hours after the news broke, but even still, I remain so confused by this trade just a few days before we enter training camp. And I don't even mean that just for the Timberwolves, but also for the Knicks, who broke up their core, especially one of their big Villanova guys who was huge for them last season in Donte DiVincenzo. So let's break it down further and what I mean by that. By the way, the editing on this is probably going to be trash, because with these types of breaking news reaction videos, I generally like to get them out as quickly as I can, and I don't put in all the effort into the editing piece of the video. I did upload a video early this morning that is a much better production on a hypothetical league-wide redraft reset. Feel free to check it out if you missed it, but I digress. So this trade has a lot of layers and a lot of areas to dissect to try and make sense of it. Now, to confirm, the full trade consists of the Wolves sending to the Knicks Karl-Anthony Towns in exchange for Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, a first-round pick via Detroit, and then there was actually a third team involved to make the money work in the Hornets, where the Knicks are sending them salary, including Daquan Jeffries, and draft compensation. At the time of this recording, it has not yet been revealed what that draft compensation looks like that's going to the Hornets. Now, let me start by saying, Julius Randle getting moved is not a surprise. The writing was on the wall that he was the odd man out going into the season, especially after the Knicks acquired Bridges, and especially considering the fact that the Knicks actually played well without Randle. And when you're paying Randle the type of money he's getting and you realize you don't really need him to make you that much better, why keep him around? But I expected that if the Knicks were going to move Randle, they were going to have to trade him for pennies on the dollar, because not a lot of teams are going to want to take on a player coming off a major injury with his contract, and typically, not all the time, but typically has been a net negative when he's on the court, and a player whose style of offense doesn't really fit well in today's NBA as a heavy isolation half-court offensive player who doesn't play defense. So when I saw that the Knicks got Karl-Anthony Towns in a deal that included Randle, I was absolutely blown away. Now, I'm not a big Cat fan, and yes, he's a flawed player as well, but I think most will agree that Cat is an upgrade over Julius Randle for the Knicks. That said, the Knicks had to also give up DiVincenzo and a first-round pick from Detroit, which, knowing the Pistons, could be a very high selection even for years to come. And of course, we have to find out what the draft compensation is the Knicks are sending to the Hornets, but my guess is it's not that much. But here's what doesn't make sense to me, though. Both teams just had one of their best seasons in decades. Both teams that have gone through years of struggling to remain relevant. Both teams that have recently made all-in type trades and big free agency signings to get to where they are today. And both of them just broke up their teams in a massive shakeup. And I know some will say, well, whatever, this isn't really that big of a breakup for the Knicks. Randle was likely getting moved anyway. DiVincenzo was actually a bigger loss for the Knicks than you think. Not only just what he brought to the court and having the best season of his career, was one of the most efficient shooters last season in the entire league, and was huge for the Knicks in the playoffs, a perfect role player and floor spacer to complement their core, but even the on-court impact that they're losing with DiVincenzo was also the chemistry and camaraderie this team built, that friendship and bond that they established, especially with the Villanova guys. And then they add another Nova guy in Mikal Bridges. They tore that all down before we even got to see a single game of these guys playing together. And then for the Timberwolves, I mean, say what you will about Cat. He has his flaws. He's had some bad moments where his play has cost the Timberwolves, but he's been with the organization for 9 years. You drafted him as your franchise player. You made an all-in move, mortgaging most of your future for Rudy Gobert so you could have Towns play the stretch four where you thought he was best served rather than playing the five. He did what he was asked, made it work to the best that he could, You end up having a great season where you go from being a play-in team to one of the top teams in the West, and you move him to put Randle in his place. You're a team that was a contender last season. The focus going into this year is how do you build upon that success and try and upgrade even further. And this is what they came up with. I love that they picked up DiVincenzo. That's going to be a bigger loss for the Knicks than most people think. But this does not feel like an upgrade to the roster for the Minnesota Timberwolves. The roster is a little clunky now. I think the backcourt is going to be fine. DiVincenzo is going to fit nicely with Anthony Edwards and Conley in the rotation coming off the bench. But the front court, I just don't see how this makes them much better than what we saw last year. And yes, I get the financial side of this. And to be honest, it's probably why the Wolves made this trade. Cat still had $220 million left on his contract. I believe it was a supermax deal. They knew that with Gobert's deal, which they need to potentially extend him, Anthony Edwards, rookie max extension set to kick in, same with Jaden McDaniels, who they give a big bag to as well. They knew financially they weren't going to be able to make this work long term. Too much money on their books, putting them over the second apron, and they also know they need to pay Naz Reid soon. Getting Cat off the books and taking on shorter-term money of Randle and DiVincenzo gives them more cap flexibility in the future. But you didn't even want to just give it one more year to see what this team can do, especially with the ascendance of Ant entering his prime. And look, if the money was the concern for the Wolves and they knew that moving Cat was the most viable option to relieve them of that, you couldn't get a better return for a stretch big all-star in his prime? A first-round pick, a role player, and a player who I consider to be a negative asset at this point in Julius Randle, just baffling to me. Going back to the Knicks though, I don't really like this trade for them either. Aside from breaking up their core, I don't see this being a move that truly gets the Knicks over the top. Now, I like this trade a lot better for the Knicks than I do the Wolves, but now you're really committed to this core, long term, paying big money to Brunson, who they just extended, Bridges, who they're going to need to extend after they just traded for him, Anunoby, who they just handed a $200+ million extension, Josh Hart, who's on a pretty hefty salary as well. I mean, you're talking about a perpetual second apron team for the foreseeable future, and I just don't see it getting them over the hump. I get why they did it. They knew that even after acquiring Bridges, that wasn't enough to get them past Boston. They needed a player to counter Porzingis. Cat is that guy. And this certainly puts the Knicks into this conversation as far as being the biggest threat to the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference, but I still don't see them getting there. And now the Knicks have relinquished most of their stockpiled draft capital with 5 picks they sent out for Bridges, which is still just insane, and now another first-round pick in this deal for Karl-Anthony Towns. They're banking on this group to work in winning them a championship. Otherwise, they're going to be in cap hell with little to no draft capital for the future if it doesn't work out. I'm not saying the Knicks are wrong for making a big gamble like this, especially being in such a big market for a franchise that hasn't won a title since the 70s. I get that, but breaking up one of the best teams you've put together in decades doesn't make a lot of sense to me. By the way, the Cat-Tibbs reunion is going to be interesting. Tibbs lost Isaiah Hartenstein, one of his favorite players, to be replaced with Cat, someone he often got very frustrated with in Minnesota. We'll see how that plays out. Anyway, I'm sure a couple days from now, when the dust settles, I might view this trade a little more favorably for both teams, but at the moment, I really don't like this for either team. And I'm almost thinking there has to be more moves at play here that haven't been revealed yet. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.